In 1960, a gallon of gasoline in the United States cost 31 cents. Today it costs more than $3. That's about 10 times more. It sounds like the clearest proof there is that everything just keeps getting more expensive. It isn't, because the number on the sign and the cost of actually filling your tank are two different stories. By the end of this, two things will be clear: whether gasoline really got more expensive, and who actually decides what it costs. Start with the honest comparison, not dollars against dollars. Dollars change value over time, and stacking one against another across 60 years hides more than it shows. Compare something that doesn't change. Time. How long a person has to work to buy 1 gallon. In 1960, the average factory wage bought a gallon of gasoline with a little under 9 minutes of work. In 2025, at a national average of $3.10, that same gallon costs about 6.5 minutes. Fewer minutes, not more. And the real peak wasn't this year or any recent spike. It was 1980, when a single gallon took more than 10 minutes of work to earn, longer than at any point before it, and longer than any point since. In work time, gasoline climbed through the 60s and 70s to that peak, then drifted back down through every decade after, up and then down. That downward drift raises the real question. There are two different ways a price can rise at all. It can climb faster than everything around it, or it can simply ride along as the dollar itself loses value. Gasoline mostly did the second. Strip inflation out of that 10 times jump, and almost all of it disappears. In real terms, once the shrinking dollar is accounted for, a gallon today costs close to what it cost in 1960. It roughly kept pace with inflation. No faster and no slower. What actually changed was pay. Wages climbed faster than prices did, and that gap is the whole story. Measured against a paycheck, the thing everyone points to as runaway cost is one of the few everyday goods that got easier to afford, not harder. One clarification, because it changes the numbers. This is regular gasoline, not diesel. Diesel runs higher, and across much of Europe, higher still. So if a gallon takes less work to buy than it did 2 generations ago, why does it still feel so expensive? Why does the price sit calm for years and then lurch 40 or 50 cents in a single week? The steadiness in the labor number hides something the sticker price makes obvious. Gasoline is one of the most volatile prices in the entire economy. The question was never why it's high. It's why it moves like that, and who is moving it. The price at the pump isn't one thing. It's a stack of 4. About half of what you pay is the cost of crude oil, the raw petroleum before it's refined into anything at all. Roughly a fifth is the refining itself, turning that crude into gasoline. About a tenth is moving it from the refinery to the station and running the station, and a little under a fifth is tax. 3 of those 4 barely move: refining, distribution, the tax. They drift slowly, year to year. The part that swings, the part behind almost every jump and drop anyone has ever watched at the pump, is the first one: crude oil. And crude oil has a feature that makes gasoline unlike almost anything else in the shopping cart. Its price isn't set in your country. It's set on a global market where a barrel pumped in Texas, in Saudi Arabia, or under the North Sea sells for essentially the same price. A market where a handful of large producers and a few political decisions can move that price faster than any refinery or any tax ever could. This is the part that gets lost every single time gas gets expensive. When the price climbs, the search for someone to blame lands, almost automatically, on whoever happens to be in office. But no president sets the price of crude. They inherit it. The market that prices a barrel of oil is larger than any one government, and it answers to things no single policy controls. A war, a production cut, a pipeline, a sudden collapse in demand. The person in office when prices rise is usually just the person who happened to be standing there when they did. To understand how gasoline became this kind of price, there's one year that matters more than any other: 1973. Before it, oil was cheap and boring. For decades, the price of a barrel barely moved. Gasoline was an afterthought in the family budget, and it stayed that way for a simple reason. The countries that burned the most oil weren't the countries that controlled it. That reversed in the autumn of 1973. A group of oil-producing nations, responding to a war in the Middle East, cut off exports to the United States. In under 6 months, the price of crude went from around $3 a barrel to nearly 12, 4 times higher, almost overnight. For the first time, the country sitting on the oil had shown they could set its price, and the country burning the most of it could only watch. What most people remember from that time is the lines. Cars backed up for blocks, stations running dry, drivers allowed to fill up only on certain days, depending on their license plate, and the embargo gets all the blame for it. But those lines had a second cause, much closer to home. The government had capped the price of gasoline, trying to shield people from the shock. And when a price is held below what the market would set, the result isn't cheap gas. It's no gas. Stations sold out and had nothing left to sell. The shortage everyone remembers was partly a policy, not only an embargo. There's one piece of the pump price that tells the exact opposite story: the tax. The federal gasoline tax in the United States comes to a little over 18 cents on every gallon. It has sat at that same figure since 1993. It has not gone up in more than 30 years. Sit with what that means. Since 1993, the dollar has lost more than half of its buying power. Nearly every other cost inside that gallon rose with time. The tax didn't. In real terms, the government now collects less than half of what that same tax was worth the year it was set. The familiar story is that taxes only ever climb. Here is one that has been quietly shrinking for 3 decades, simply by standing still. Even the parts that don't swing carry their own strange history. The United States hasn't built a major new oil refinery since the 1970s. The number of refineries fell from about 300 in the early 1980s to around 130 today. And yet the country refines more gasoline than it ever has, because the ones that survived grew enormous. Fewer plants, each doing far more. Which also means that when one of them has a problem, there's less slack in the system to absorb it, and the price feels it fast. This is where the view from outside the country becomes useful. Ask someone in Germany about American gas prices and they'll tell you it's cheap, because they are paying closer to $8 or $9 a gallon, sometimes more. Same crude oil, same global market. The enormous gap between what an American pays and what a European pays comes down almost entirely to one thing: tax. Most of a European pump price is government levy. Most of an American one isn't. The fuel underneath is identical. The policy wrapped around it is not. Something similar happens inside the United States. The same gallon on the same day can cost nearly twice as much in one state as in another, and the reason usually isn't a company or a shortage. It's a set of rules specific to that state. That's a story for its own right. Step back to the bigger picture though, and there's a final twist that sharpens the whole point. In the decades after 1973, the United States became the largest oil producer on Earth. It pumps more crude than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia. On paper, that should mean control. The country producing the most of something ought to be able to set its price. But oil doesn't work that way. Because a barrel can be shipped anywhere, it sells everywhere at the same world price. So even as the biggest producer on the planet, the country still pays the global rate for its own oil. Producing the most of it never meant deciding what it costs, which leaves the question all of this points to. For most of the last century, the price of filling a tank was decided close to home. Since 1973, it hasn't been. The number on the sign is less a measure of oil than a measure of how much control a country actually holds over something it cannot do without. So the 31 cents from 1960 was never really the point. Gasoline didn't get expensive so much as it got unpredictable. A cheap, steady thing that turned into a price the country no longer sets for itself. The cost was never just the number on the pump. It was the quiet handover of who gets to decide it.